Good morning. Should we get going? Morning, everyone. Welcome to the February 18th, 2025 Metro Work Session. Georgia, will you please call the roll and start recording?
Yes, Councilor Nolan,
Good morning.
Councilor Wong,
Present.
Councilor Gonzalez,
Present.
Councilor Lewis,
Present.
Councilor Simpson,
Present.
Councilor Rosenthal should be here shortly, and Council President Peterson.
Here, thank you. Councilors, before we begin our agenda items, can we please play the safety video for our in-person attendees?
I'm Jason, and I'm an event production manager. Here at the Portland 5 Centers for the Arts, safety is our #1 priority, not only for our guests, but for our staff members. I'm at the Portland 5 Centers for the Arts, and you're at the Metro Regional Center. The council chambers are located on the 3rd floor. In the event of a fire or fire alarm, please exit through the door in the northeast corner of the room. Go down the stairway to the 2nd floor, exit through the main entrance by the reception desk, and gather in the courtyard outside that entrance. In the event of a medical or fire emergency, please call 911 and notify the security agent at the reception desk. The nearest defibrillator is mounted on the steps leading from the reception desk down to Grand Avenue. Thank you, and come visit us at Portland 5.
Great, thank you. We have two presentations and discussions today. The first is the Investment and Innovation Grant Program Assessment. Councilors, we will start today with this. Since this program began in 2018, we've invested more than $12 million on projects that help reduce the harmful impacts of waste generated in our region while advancing racial equity. But since 2018, some exciting developments like the passage of the Recycling Modernization Act and the creation of Metro's Reuse Impact Fund have created the opportunity for us to be more strategic in supporting innovation. Staff are coming forward, I hope. Dr. Marta McGuire, Waste Prevention and Environmental Services Director, and Susan Pelozzo, Investment and Innovation Grant Manager, are coming forward to share the assessment and recommendations for future investments. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. Thank you, President Petersons. Good morning, councilors. Again, I'm Marta McGuire, Waste Prevention and Environmental Services Department Director. We appreciate the opportunity to engage with you today. As President Peterson noted, we are here to discuss the assessment of the Investment and Innovation Grant Program. Staff conducted a review to evaluate its impact and alignment with current priorities, and our goal is to share key findings and recommendations and seek council's direction on next steps. If you go to the next slide, our presentation will cover an overview of the assessment and a staff recommendation to defer the development of a new innovation-focused program at this time. We want to ensure that Metro's resources are aligned with council priorities, and your guidance today will help shape how we move forward. So with that, I will turn it over to Suzanne.
Good morning, Council President Peterson and councilors. My name is Suzanne Peluso. I use she, her pronoun, excuse me, she, her pronouns, and I manage Metro's Investment and Innovation Grant Program. Next slide, please. So as Marta noted, we did an assessment of the program over the last year, and the reason was to align the program with new priorities and policies and funding streams that had come on the scene since the program launched in 2018. We've had 5 funding cycles to date, investing in a wide range of creative strategies of nonprofits and businesses to prevent waste and make better use of discarded materials in ways that advance equity and benefit community. This has included investments in recycling and composting infrastructure, food rescue and redistribution, investments in the reuse, repair, and share systems and businesses and organizations, and more. So as President Peterson mentioned, we've made investments of almost $13 million in the region over these 5 cycles, funding 62 different organizations and businesses through 84 individual grants. So the drivers for the assessment and the need to pause the program were a couple. One, the Recycling Modernization Act has come on the scene, and that's going to fund a lot of recycling infrastructure investments in areas where the Investment and Innovation Program has funded. Also, the System Facilities Plan is in development, and that's including new funding and investment priorities that are emerging rapidly and about to be approved. So we're here to share the results of the assessment that was just completed and a recommendation for the investment and innovation program for your consideration. Next slide. The assessment included a multifaceted year of engagement and research, including looking at what we've done over the last 5 years and learnings from our past grant cycles, what worked well and where we could improve. And hearing from grantees, potential applicants, and local government partners about current needs and opportunities. A lot of work with our research and analytics teams to look at how we could invest more strategically to reduce the harmful impacts of climate change, particularly focusing on a set of materials that have high greenhouse gas emissions, and taking a hard look at the innovation side of the investment innovation program. Next slide. We received a lot of feedback, and this is just a few of the themes represented in these quotes about the program when we solicited input from nonprofits, community-based organizations, industry, small businesses, and local government partners on the program's impacts and options for the future. These are just representative of a few of those themes. We heard broad support for the program and enthusiasm for its positive impacts, both on the waste stream and in community. Many see a lot of value in the program's willingness to fund innovation and try new strategies and technologies, and highlighted the need for innovation in this field. We got a lot of support for the idea of focusing our investments around high impact materials and focusing upstream on prevention and reuse, while some of our stakeholders noted the need to continue to invest in recycling and compost systems. And we heard strong support for maintaining and strengthening the program's equity tactics and goals. Next slide, please. So these are, again, just a few of the assessment findings. So we have a 41-page report detailing a lot more, but these are some of the themes that rose to the top. The program has had significant impact on both the waste reduction and equity outcomes, specifically around job creation, support for BIPOC businesses, community-based organizations. And I want to just acknowledge we have at least one of our grant recipients in the audience here, and just highlighting all the great work that these organizations and businesses have done with these investments and their own resources brought to the table to match. There are opportunities to have an even greater impact through, as I mentioned, focusing on high impact materials. And we need to keep working to reduce barriers for underserved communities and emerging businesses. We got a lot of feedback and ideas for how to do that through our programs. And I look forward to bringing some of these recommendations to other Metro grant programs and our partners in grant programs at DEQ and elsewhere. Sharing those, so as a community of practice, we can grow in that area. And we heard strong, pardon me. So the last one I want to highlight is really significant. That is the overlap with the Recycling Modernization Act and the proposed Reuse Impact Fund. These two policies and legislation and funding programs. The Recycling Modernization Act includes multiple funding streams. As I mentioned, they're going to be able to fund recycling infrastructure. There's also a separate funding stream around prevention and reuse that is going to be coming on the scene soon. And the proposed Reuse Impact Fund really is going to more effectively fund reuse organizations in a sustaining way. It's going to be multi-year funding dedicated for reuse organizations in the region. So there's a lot of overlap. Those two opportunities really cover almost half of or more of what the I&I program has been funding. Next slide, please. So where does this leave the Investment Innovation Grant Program? The assessment identified fostering innovation in the circular economy as an opportunity that is not covered by these other funding streams and still a need in the region. When we talk about the circular economy, just a jargon check, we're referring to a regenerative system that believes that all materials have value and there's value in keeping them in circulation as long as possible. And it's more than just end of life. It also is looking at manufacturing and product design. It's a whole systems approach to keeping materials in circulation and reducing waste. And there is a need for innovation in this field. Review committees, however, in our attempts to fund innovation through the I&I program struggled, and we had sort of mixed results in this area. The review committees really needed ways of validating new technologies, and the traditional grant program model was not particularly effective in nurturing ideas, especially for underserved entrepreneurs or new emerging organizations. And so what we learned through our attempts to fund innovation is that a lot of the applications asked us for help with technical support in overcoming hurdles, supply chain agreements, identifying end markets, navigating the regulatory requirements. We needed ways to do that, particularly in culturally relevant ways. And the program as designed as a traditional grant program model didn't have that built in. Next slide. So we dug a little bit deeper. Next slide, please. We dug a little bit deeper on ways we could more effectively support innovation, and we researched different models in other states. We found one model successfully operating in 3 states called Next Cycle. The goal of these types of programs is it's really a suite of programming more than just funding. It's, as I mentioned before, it's a way of incubating good ideas, making them ready for funding at higher levels of success. I think this would fill the gaps that our review committees and our applicants needed through a model where there's more than just funding. There's a lot of technical support, mentorship, coaching, business incubator elements, but it would require partnering with a contractor to bring in that technical expertise and subject matter expertise. It'd be a very different program. Next slide. Oh, and one thing I wanted to add on that last slide, it would also be more effective statewide. The models we looked at were all operating on a statewide level. So it's something that if we were to go down that road, we would want to find other funders and partners to build the support ecosystem needed to make it really effective. So in weighing the recommendations for the Investment and Innovation Program, we're balancing several considerations. We've got new funding streams both from Metro and at the state level, and upcoming large investments through the System Facilities Plan. All of this together is focusing on reuse, prevention, recycling, and the System Facilities Plan will be addressing compost infrastructure. And while the innovation concept is really exciting, we think it has a lot of potential here, it would be a different program entirely and require significant resources and capacity, and it would be most effective at the state level. So, and the third consideration really is that the priorities for the regional system fee investments are filling critical system gaps through the projects that are going to be coming out through the System Facilities Plan. Next slide. So given these considerations, we recommend that we defer the development of the innovation programming at this time and focus our efforts on the rollout of the Reuse Impact Fund and development of the projects to achieve the ambitious goals of the System Facilities Plan. And I'll turn it back to President Peterson for discussion.
Councilors, comments, suggestions? Seeing no one raise their hands, I think we've had a lot of conversations along this lines to prepare us for this conversation. And I just want to say thank you to the staff for working so hard to analyze the effectiveness of the funds. And I think they have been effective. And I think it was a good program in its time. But as we look to the future, it looks like we have opportunities to do some other things and work with a statewide program. So I just want to compliment you on moving in this direction and giving us the opportunity to think about the other opportunities coming up. Councilor Wong.
Yep, thank you, Madam President. I appreciate the staff recommendation for deferring the program. Have you brought that back to the stakeholders you engaged previously in this creation process? Like, what does that look like to report back?
That would be the next step. So what we have shared as the process was engaging with stakeholders as a part of the assessment, getting direction from you, and then we would absolutely loop back to those that engaged in that assessment on the council direction.
And I guess I'm curious, like what kind of momentum we would lose, like, if we were to defer. It seemed like there'd be new startup costs potentially. I think we might lose momentum with stakeholders. Like, I guess what are the opportunity costs for delay? I mean, I understand the arguments for it, but it seems like we are potentially missing an opportunity. And then I guess where then would I&I dollars, like what would happen to those resources in the meantime if there were a deferral?
That's a great question. I think it's important to note that the program has been on pause for the last year as a part of the assessment. So it's not currently in the budget with the exception of the resources that are committed to outstanding grants. I would say a lot of the momentum we've seen flow in to the proposed reuse impact fund that came up as a part of the conversation in the assessment that we did as an opportunity for where these dollars could be invested, and at the same time was discussed as a part of the system facilities plan. In terms of opportunity cost, if we were going to develop a more innovation focused program, it would be really developing a brand new program. This is substantially different from the types of grant programs that we've had in the past because of that technical expertise that we would need to contract out for. So we'd be really starting up something very brand new, which is in part why we think deferring this at this moment in time is the best. It doesn't mean that innovation is off the table, but it's about timing and making sure that we are addressing council's most critical priorities first. And what we have heard was those critical priorities around the system facilities plan and the reuse impact fund.
And just to add one more thing, we did do a feasibility study on next cycle for the state of Oregon. And so there has been some momentum, but that work, it's not lost. And I think we can keep having those conversations with DEQ and partners in the region and sort of floating those ideas. And when the timing is right, perhaps it could reemerge, because I don't think that work's lost. And I think it can hold for a time. It was just an initial scoping. So yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Councilors, any other comments, suggestions? All right.
Say something.
Councilor Gonzalez.
Yeah, no, thanks. I know we had a really good discussion about this. Was it last week, 2 weeks ago? And so I feel like on that end, when it comes to, for this agency and for this team doing innovation, I think we have an incredible record of being leaders in terms of helping things pencil with impact. And so I want to kind of like call in that history of our programs and services that we've been able to offer specifically. I mean, I&I or non-I&I programs, Natural Paint among a few others. And that work has resulted in a growing movement for greater policy change at the state level, hopefully nationally or whatever, as who knows what's going to happen there. But I think for this agency, we're asking the right questions in terms of these kind of investment dollars. What are those top priorities going to be for us? And so I just want to continue to emphasize my support for that and finding the opportunity to keep our powder dry for when those opportunities come up, especially with such a major changing landscape and high level policy and potential resources coming from the state. So that is that element of innovation. And I totally understand that, like, someone that's worked with and helped run a nonprofit for a long time, sometimes funders are like, hey, we have this innovation grant, and you feel like you need to innovate every single year. But in reality, that's where I want to emphasize the importance of the investment piece, because again, I'm preaching to the choir here, but we know that there's a significant amount of work that needs to happen in the region around all of our environmental waste reduction goals, and the investment bit and the things that we know works is where frankly we need to find the resources to do that. So anyway, I feel like I'm just kind of repeating what you said, but I wanna just emphasize that this conversation hopefully will be important. You know, Councilor Lewis and I, we worked on a budget element this a few months ago to support with our reuse ecosystem, and I've been really happy to see the results of that. And so that I think about investment in that, you know, that is innovative in its own way, but it's also like meat and potatoes. People need those basic services. And then thinking about our system facilities plan, I really want those things to be highly integrated so that if we're going to be, you know, in air quotes, like a loss leader, or we're doing something to really help spurn or catalyze a sector of this ecosystem, that we're able to do that. So anyway, just you did a lot of hard work. I wanted to say some words as well, and I see a lot of the team here, so I can tell that this is important for WPEZ.
Appreciate
And
that.
appreciate y'all. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Councilor Lewis.
Sure, thank you. I couldn't miss an opportunity to thank the staff for the work, for the journey. In terms of the past 6 years of this program, we've had everything from wanting to grow it to wanting to study it to wanting to reinvent it. So it's been wild. Thank you for being along with us. And I think you felt many of those same things we've desired. But when I think about the global scale of waste and what truly ails us, it is on the consumption side that we consume too much. And then on the disposal side, yes, we've spent a lot of time trying to make sure products reach the most desirable end of life or end market when they get there. But we haven't really confronted the fact that we spend so much fossil fuel shipping things all over this country and all over this planet. And I think with this direction to basically double down on keeping products in the region, keeping products alive for second and third and fourth wears and uses, we can reduce some of that. And I really just want to be conscious of that tension. There are places that will accept or potentially find renewed life in products that have run their course in this country, but to what social and environmental degradation. And I know that we have a big challenge ahead of us because we can't act alone. So I do appreciate moving up to the state scale, and would hope that we would encourage the state to find other actors who want to do very similar or parallel programs. But thank you for the work.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councilor Wong.
Sorry, my hand was still up.
All right. Well, I think we've come to the conclusion of comments and just thank yous. So just acknowledgement again of the amazing amount of work that's gone into this program, the good work done by our partners, and hopefully the good work that will continue as we move into the future with a statewide program. So thank you, everybody. All right, Council, we will move on to our second agenda item for today, and it is the introduction to the state mandated regional housing coordination strategy. This is about our role in the statewide efforts to implement land use planning goals and increase housing production. As cities across Oregon develop housing production strategies to meet state requirements, Metro must complete a regional housing coordination strategy this calendar year. We have Emily Lieb, Housing Policy Director, and Aaron Key, Urban Policy and Development Manager, here to share the scope of the work and propose an approach for engagement. And I just want to note that we also are looking at including this in our proposed Housing and Homelessness Policy Advisory Committee as part of the reform effort for the Supportive Housing Service measure implementation, so that we are pairing up housing conversations with homelessness conversations. So we're meeting both the inflow and outflow conversation. We're at that. With that, I will turn it over to Aaron and Emily.
Great. Good morning, Metro Council President and councilors. Very happy to be here today. We have a short presentation. I'm going to kick us off, and then Aaron will do the second half, and we'll have plenty of time for questions, feedback, and discussion. But as Council President Peterson introduced, this is our first update to you all on the Regional Housing Coordination Strategy, which is a collaborative project of the Planning Department and the Housing Department. And for today, we will be reviewing the state mandate for this work, going over our scope of work and our engagement approach. And then we'll have plenty of time for discussion. So next slide, please. So starting with the state requirements, in 2019, the state legislature passed House Bill 2003, which established the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis Framework. This legislation created a new statewide approach to analyzing existing housing supply and gaps and estimating housing needs for the next 20 years. Under the framework, the state is allocating housing targets to cities and counties and requires that cities and counties with populations over 10,000 create housing production strategies every 6 years. The state also required that Metro create a regional housing coordination strategy. And that strategy is due within 1 year of the urban growth management decision. So that will be due in December of 2025. Metro is the only region required by the state to create a coordination strategy. Other regions are invited to, and it's an option for them to create a strategy. Next slide, please. So what is a regional housing coordination strategy? Ultimately, it is a list of actions that Metro can take to advance housing production and coordination and access in our region. Specifically, the state calls out the development and maintenance of diverse housing types that are high quality, physically accessible, and affordable, housing with access to economic opportunities, services, and amenities, and actions that affirmatively further fair housing. And examples of actions could be strategies to identify and remove barriers to housing production, whether those are financial, regulatory, or capacity related. It could be about coordinating and lifting up strategies at the local level. And finally, allocation of resources such as funding, staff capacity, or technical assistance. Next slide, please. The state also calls out several areas of analysis that should inform the strategy, and those are listed here on the slide. Ultimately, this work will build upon work that has been created in both planning and housing over the last few years. The planning department just wrapped up the growth management process and through that work estimated a total of 24,000 units needed to meet housing needs today and 150,000 units for the next 20 years, of which approximately 2/3 will need to be affordable to households earning 80% of AMI or area median income or below. The growth report also highlighted several demographic trends that impact housing needs, including lower birth rates, an aging population, and historic underproduction of affordable housing. Due to the legacy of racist policies and practices throughout our housing systems, we know that communities of color are disproportionately represented among those experiencing housing cost burden and homelessness. And so throughout our analysis, we will be seeking opportunities to disaggregate data to understand these trends by race and ethnicity. We also have an opportunity to build on some work that the Housing Department did over the last few years. In 2024, the Housing Department conducted an evaluation of affordable housing investment opportunities, which informed the COO's recommendation to the Council around affordable housing funding in the recommendation from July of last year. This analysis was informed by interviews with dozens of practitioners in affordable housing development, funding, and operations, and included consideration of market and industry challenges and opportunities, including alignment across funding streams and but integration between housing and services. Next slide, please. So this work really represents an opportunity to coordinate. It's, as you know, I just discussed, the coordination between the planning department and the housing department, but also the opportunity to work with cities and counties that are creating housing production strategies. And there are 18 jurisdictions required to create production strategies in our region. To coordinate with those jurisdictions around a regional strategy, but also to think about how we integrate those strategies into broader goals around land use, transportation, climate resilience, and our homelessness response. And this work will be informed by ongoing engagement with jurisdictions responsible to create production strategies, as well as housing authorities and housing divisions in larger jurisdictions. We also plan to incorporate some additional engagement with housing developers, both market rate and affordable, as well as housing advocacy organizations. And Erin will talk a little bit more later about how we are incorporating fair housing and racial equity lens throughout the project, ultimately looking at considerations related to geographic distribution, accessibility, and affordability of current and needed housing. And next slide. So this is a draft vision statement for the project. Ultimately, we see this as a roadmap for actions that Metro can take to advance housing production, coordination, and access over the next 6 years. And we'll achieve this by lifting up best practices, coordinating and aligning local strategies, and identifying critical gaps that can be filled at the regional level. And I think, that's really a key component, is understanding where Metro is uniquely positioned to add value and fill gaps to support our partners in this work. This project also presents opportunities to align with the potential SHS reforms that the council is discussing. If a measure to expand allowable uses of SHS to include affordable housing is referred and passed, the supportive housing services funding will play an integral role in bridging the gap in affordable housing funding and our affordable housing construction pipeline that was created by the 2018 bond, but is currently nearly fully deployed. Metro has a unique opportunity to leverage this strategy to think holistically about integrating housing production strategies with supportive housing services in a way that is supportive to the diversity of housing needs in our region. And next slide, I'm going to turn it over to Erin.
Thank you, Emily. Good morning, Metro Council President and councilors. I'm Erin Key. I use she, her pronouns. And I'm going to get into a bit more details. I'm going to talk about our planned scope of work, and I'm going to dig into our engagement strategy so that you can understand the C, the very important C in regional housing coordination strategy, of how we plan to coordinate. So this slide shows you kind of our approach to the scope of work, and this is something that's echoed in a material that's in your packet for today's meeting. We began the process late in 2024 with some pre-scoping activities. Several cities, the 18 jurisdictions that Emily mentioned, who are required to do housing production strategies, have already done those strategies. For example, Hillsborough, the city of Portland, Milwaukee are a couple of examples. So I'm going to speak in a moment, but we've been doing that homework to understand what those strategies are already saying and what some of the goals and needs of those local communities are. And we've used those pre-scoping activities to develop this scope and approach to doing the work. A big part of it is the analysis. Emily laid out what was required in the legislation in terms of the kind of analysis that we need to do in order to inform this strategy. But a big part of it is the ongoing engagement that I'm going to dive into. This is how we identify the strategies, is by working closely with the jurisdictions who are producing housing production strategies and with the developers that Emily mentioned. And then using an evaluation tool to filter those strategies and identify which strategies to include in a final plan to bring back to council for approval at the end of this year. So you can see that this graphic kind of shows that filtering of reaching broadly to identify a broad reach of strategies, and then filtering those strategies through an evaluation tool to result in the strategies that become part of the plan in the end. Next slide. So this is where I talk a bit about that homework. A lot of work understanding what is in housing production strategies, doing interviews both internally and externally to understand some of the initial identified barriers and what folks think some of the needs could be for housing production strategies. We've been doing that work over the last several months to inform this approach that we're bringing to you today. Next slide. Decision-making for the plan is probably similar to what you've been used to. Metro Council is required to adopt this plan at the end of 2025, so you will be the decision maker. Metro committees, standing committees, MTAC and MPAC will be involved because of the relationship to land use. And we've already started to engage CORE. We'll be attending their meeting this week to talk with CORE about this plan and figure out with them collaboratively the kind of involvement that they want to have with it. I'm going to be going into some more detail as I go into the engagement plan about how we want to engage the 18 regions, cities, and the 3 counties that are required to do housing production strategies, where we want to brainstorm and work with them to collaborate on the identification of strategies. And of course, the blue section here just represents the teams working collaboratively between the housing department and the planning department here in Metro to produce this strategy. Next slide. All right, so this is where we really want to dive in on the engagement approach and get council feedback on how we're approaching this. Obviously, a regional coordination strategy is about bringing that regional perspective to this housing production crisis. We need to work with and understand the needs of the folks on the ground who are working to produce these housing units, and the cities and the counties, the regulators who are working with those developers on permitting and regulations and have funding needs, to understand the dynamics that they're dealing with and to find out what support Metro can provide on a regional level to support that housing production and keep it moving forward. So our intent is to organize an implementers work group that includes the cities and counties required to do those local housing production strategies, as well as the housing authorities at those cities and those counties primarily, to get their feedback and thoughts about informing these strategies. We will also have external focus groups with developers, both private side developers and affordable housing providers and housing advocacy organizations, to understand their perspectives, primarily about barriers that they're facing in the production of both kinds of housing, as well as the needs that they see on the regional level, and bringing all of those together to identify our broad set of strategies to be reviewed and get their feedback as well on our evaluation tool. Next slide. So we will, as I said, be engaging Metro standing committees. MTAC and MPAC have gotten an initial overview of this process and what's required of Metro by the state. Once we have this scope of work and council feedback on our engagement plan, we'll go back to those groups and start working on their feedback about strategies. And we intend to continue seeing those groups through the process so that they can follow along and understand the direction that it's going and have transparency about what Metro will be putting in its strategy. I talked a bit about CORE. We'll be there this week. We'll be working closely with CORE's chairs and the committee to determine how CORE wants to be involved in this process, and then following up with as many meetings as are required to do that. And then we will also like to keep Metro Council involved along the way so that you can see how this plan is coming together before it comes back to you at the end of later in the year for approval. Next slide. Emily talked about the ways in which we will be working to advance Metro's strategic plan to advance racial equity and inclusion through this process. And we have begun using the DEI department's racial equity framework tool. We're going to be using it 4 times throughout this process. So at the beginning to help us with scoping, in the first quarter, I guess, to kind of look at the strategies they're developing, understand the engagement that just occurred to date. And each of these opportunities give us a chance to just add more recommendations and changes and kind of right the ship as we go along. Oh no, the battery. So we'll be checking in 4 times. And what this means, you can go to the next slide. The DEI program's racial equity tool. Oh, whoops. I was expecting a different slide. Sorry, I'll just keep talking on that point. It asks staff to bring together a group of folks who are internal staff who are working on the project and to go through several identified steps of asking questions about what they were doing to reflect on the racial equity impacts. So this shows you an example of a few of the actions that were identified by the staff team in working through our first framework discussion. We identified, we're working to develop racial equity tools for the project that could evolve and change over the course of the project, evaluate our data sources. So I told you that a big part of this scope is the analysis that's required by the state. And we think it's really important to look at those data sources, look at barriers, and understand the limitations of the data sources that we're using. And last, staff thought it was very important that we make sure that our evaluation framework, when it's looking at those strategies, make sure that we have metrics in it to understand how those strategies have a fair housing impact. So these are examples of the kind of things that will be coming out of these racial equity check-ins, and we're planning 3 more through the process, which we can give you updates on when we come back to council. Next slide. So this is our last slide. I just want to show you how it all works out in time. Those lightning bolts are very important racial equity framework check-ins. So you can see, as I was talking about, we did 1 during scoping, but we have 3 more ahead of us. We'll be doing the analysis and the identification of strategies simultaneously, and then begin the creation of an evaluation tool that will then filter those strategies to produce the framework and the strategy for council review and approval in the fall and into the winter. So this is the last slide, so you can go to the next one. And this is where we'd like to hear from council, your questions and your thoughts and ideas about our engagement strategy to confirm that we're on the right track. So thank you very much.
Thank you to both of you. Councilor Nolan.
Thanks, Madam President. Thank you. Good synopsis. Could we put back the second to the last slide on racial equity example check-in? I'm interested, as you're looking to develop goals for advancing racial equity consistent with the racial equity policy, how are you going to measure current conditions? Because I assume a goal means you want something to change, that you want some improvements. Do we have current status information from which we're going to try to improve X% or Y, whatever? Or do we have to create those?
So I should clarify, these racial equity goals are for the project and our process. So it's what we want to achieve with this effort here at Metro over the next year in the process of developing our plan. So it's a little bit less about what changes we want to see in the world and more about the effect that we want to make sure that our strategy can have. Does that make sense?
And you're not planning on addressing the racial equity impacts of implementing a plan?
Of course we do, and we want to do that with our strategy itself, but that's more the data and analysis will come with the development of the strategy. These racial equity goals guide how we approach the development of that strategy. That's right, they're process oriented. These ones.
Okay, good to clarify, thanks.
Yeah.
Where in the work plan is establishing racial equity goals for the implementation of the plan?
I think that will come in the development of our strategies, right? We need strategies that help us, because we're going to be, as you asked, how are we going to understand where we're starting from? And that is the analysis. So there's two big pieces of the scope of work, and that's the value, the analysis and the collection of data and information, as well as the identification of strategies that we want to lead to particular outcomes. And I think in those strategies is where we'll identify the need for specific goals.
Thanks. I would request that incorporation of a current status of racial equity factors be completed intentionally and not sort of as part of. I think it'll be somewhere else. What I'm hearing is that your team hasn't yet deliberately and assertively incorporated delivering racial equity outcomes by implementing the plan that's developed. If the plan isn't developed in order to improve racial equity within housing,
Yeah,
then
I see what you're saying. I think I'd like to adjust my answer. I think that's our evaluation criteria. The development of our evaluation criteria are guided in part by the state regulations. Like, there are very specific things that we need to evaluate our strategies for, but we also need to work in our own, what we want to evaluate them for as well. So I think the development of that evaluation criteria is what sets our expectations of what we want our strategies to achieve. So it's, and we have opportunities worked in to bring back those evaluation strategies here to Metro Council. So that is an opportunity for you to weigh in.
Great. I'm just asking for you to amend a little further and not,
Great. Okay.
I think it will be here, but instead say, I'll make sure it's here.
You got it. Thank you.
Just to weigh in before I call on Councilors Lewis and Huang, to Councilor Nolan's point, I think using the fact that Metro uses targeted universalism, I think we should look at in the plan how to stratify the entirety of the spectrum of housing that we're trying to implement here and figure out the gaps within each demographic. And then look at the different strategies that would be appropriate to try and fill those gaps. That is targeted universalism, I think, is at its best in terms of trying to figure out which strategies apply to which of the populations to get that production up as quickly as possible. So that's one way to take a run at looking at this.
Thank you.
Councilor Lewis.
Sure, thank you so much. I just want to start by kind of taking a step back. The legislature calling on our region uniquely to do this work, I think is a good thing, because Metro is well positioned to bring local jurisdictions together to execute a regional housing strategy. I do think we both have a planning and a housing kind of side of house, and between the two, we understand the region's future needs and how to integrate a housing strategy that does incorporate housing for people, but also housing as a tool that fits within the bigger context of transportation, land use, and climate resilience. So I do think this is a good framework and a good process. So thank you for bringing it forward. I do want to kind of bring forward the tension of sharing this between housing and planning. I think we have a lot of expertise in both departments. But at the end of the day, if we are really planning for the future that's going to produce the number of units that are necessary, we have to plan for the market to be able to pick up and run with the housing future. We have seen a significant number of the units being produced, particularly in the city of Portland, recently have public funds invested. And yes, that's great because of the amount of public funds we have, because we have both the city of Portland and a metro bond. So we can pat ourselves on the back. It's actually a signal of disease in the market, that there is such a large proportion of publicly funded projects in the works right now. So while I want to champion the work that we've done, we just have to continue to focus on the work that planning can do and has traditionally done at helping plan for jurisdictions to have, permitting is the thing that comes up most often, but to have land use plans and to have processes that make it possible to build in every corner of our region.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Wong and then Gonzalez.
Great, thank you. Yeah, just continuing that line of thought. I'm really curious how we might think about having this, regional housing coordination strategy and how that then translate into specific policy. And yeah, like what are the elements that give this strategy some teeth, right? Because I think there are a lot of strategies out there to increase housing production. The governor had a task force, but when the rubber met the road, like we weren't able to shift the actual policies to facilitate that production. So I think we know what we got to do, and like what is it in this process that takes the data and the best practices, but then translates it into policy change and investment. And I think just to put a finer point on Councilor Lewis's point, like the city of Portland, I think last year permitted about 1,000 housing units, 500 were multifamily. And the city needs about like 5,000 a year, I think was the number. And in 2022, I think they permitted around 4,000. But like last year, we were at like 20% of production that we needed. So yeah, I'm just wondering like how is it that we can work together to catch up? And that's going to require significant policy changes and changes in economic conditions and all that. But yeah, just curious how this tool might lead to the shifts that we need for it to actually be effective, and if you have any initial thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've laid a challenge to us all is to seek that out and figure it out over the course of this process. But I can tell you where my hope is. My hope is that we identify by talking with our local communities about what they're struggling with, we might be able to identify specific roles that Metro can play in easing those needs. Now you've identified there's some bigger issues that are much bigger than the cities and counties, much bigger than Metro. As Councilor Lewis brought up, there's the market, there's the funding structures, there's issues at the state and our federal government. So, but I'm finding a lot of hope in imagining the possibilities of just really opening this conversation with our jurisdictional partners to understand what they need and to be very specific about identifying actions that Metro can do with it. That's what's in our control. So I imagine a strategy at the end that will include both immediate things that we know we can do, that we have the resources to do, that are new ideas that we haven't thought of on our own, and probably more long-term big policy changes and things that we'll need to come together with those jurisdictional partners and advocate for on larger scales over time. So that's just what I'm hoping and imagining at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think the success of a strategy really depends on political will. And I think we have planning and we have housing, but I think the implementation side is the most important side. So I think, having really good involvement from our GAPD team and like having those conversations with regional partners and, with the state are going to be really important. Mm-hmm. And this conversation that I think could be different is having some real clear and honest conversations about trade-offs in terms of like, what is it that we want from our housing production system? And is it like, do we need to have like bike parking in every apartment? I know those are all like political flashpoints, but like if we don't confront them head on, I think this is what happened before, was like we had these ideas and then there were sacred cows that, you know, communities, partners would not budge on. And then that kind of made that policy shift extremely difficult. So if we're not addressing those, you know, points of conflict head on, I think we're just kind of creating a strategy in a vacuum where it's not going to go anywhere because we didn't actually talk through the trade-offs that we need to be making.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Gonzalez.
That was some good stuff from Councilor Wong there, and I want to like pick up on that and keep building on it. And I think that this is going to be a really important project and effort that we take on to make sure it's not just like a regulatory checkbox, but it really is a process that helps us all. And I know there's so much energy across a lot of jurisdictions to do the work here. But to build a political will, like Councilor Wong mentioned, to do the work that's necessary. I mean, I think we are in a bit of a housing production emergency or a crisis. You know, I think we use that language all the time, and I think we need to have conversations that are a crisis level response. And trade-offs is a core piece of that. I mean, like, I think for me, as we go into this, I'm like, there are no sacred cows in this like housing production work that we're doing. And so what is it that we need to be really leaning into? And I think from the conversations that many of us have been able to have, depending on what seat at the table you're sitting at, you know, some people might say like, oh, developers are too greedy, permits take too long, requirements are unreasonable. I mean, like there's a lot of finger pointing, right? And like, I think frankly, what we need to do is really kind of come together and figure out what is it that's actually going to take us to do that. And, you know, I'm heartened that we're planning and that we have a plan. But one thing that is kind of a growing little frustration within me is that we love to plan. We love to plan about how we're going to plan, but eventually we need to start doing. And so that is the challenge, I think, before you and before us at Metro, all while being in a pretty resource constrained environment. And so I'm hopeful that this process helps us identify major financial calls to action from the legislature that we can pair with policy treatments that can help us to meet our goals. So there's that. And also, I mean, kind of coming back into the question about our equity goals and our production strategy. I just did like a little ChatGPT data analytics thing. So the numbers might not be right, but like I just want to use them as an example. So it's my AI disclaimer. I think what we build matters and the way that we build it matters. But also who gets to take advantage of those opportunities matter. So for example, I did some refinement, and from 1990 to 2025, the home ownership rate for Black communities, Hispanic communities, communities of color has remained essentially flat. And that's kind of crazy to think about. And to me, that's a problem. I think housing in this country has always represented an opportunity for the American dream, to build generational wealth, to own a part of your community. And so I would like for us to really think through that as well for communities. You know, I think multifamily and apartments are a really important part of the housing stock. But one thing I hear really loud and clear from my constituents is like, and from the community that I grew up in, is like, we don't want to live in an apartment for our whole lives. We want to know opportunity to buy, to own a home, to own something. And that's a really deep driving thing. And so I think there's a whole bunch of different ways to do that. You know, I'm not just talking about like house with a picket fence, because I do think we need to redefine what home ownership means in the 21st century, especially in a city like ours. But I think there has to be a really like essential piece to that conversation. So one, that is one really important thing that I wanted to highlight. And if there's anything that we take away, I think we really need to have some serious conversations about the trade-offs, because there are trade-offs. You know, we can't have some of the strongest land use laws in the country and then also have super restrictive zoning within the urban core or the biggest cities in the region that, you know, set all these requirements that don't make pencils project, right? So I mean, like, I think there's a lot of good idealism that is not connecting to the economics, into the way that we can also make private capital work for us and for our goals. So anyway, I want to work with y'all on this so much. I think that I'm hoping that this is something that will also come up in our future vision project. And I think in general, as you know, we're entering this next decade, next few you know, chapters of Portland in our region, that's going to be the big question for us and the West Coast. So I'm excited to work with y'all. I think you're going to do great. You've done incredible work at the agency, so do it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Simpson.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Emily and Aaron, for your presentation. I'm gonna kind of build off of what Councilor Gonzalez and Councilor Wong were talking about. That piece around generational wealth building and those opportunities, but I think it goes a little bit deeper than just saying we don't want to live in apartments our entire life. I think it goes into more so, what is the opportunity to build yourself out of an apartment and build a wealth around that. And I think part of it too is, as we have this conversation around like providing homes for folks, like it has to go hand in hand with like what the employment opportunities look like or the landscape looks like for folks, because mortgages are not cheap. Rent is already high. And what are we going to have, an affordable housing build out program? I don't know if that is going to be something that we can do to scale. So I do want to say, like, if we do want to actually have and put a dent on it, and to Councilor Gonzalez's point, like, it's been known that like housing gaps exist within communities of color, particularly in Black and Brown communities. If we don't make a concerted effort, when will we? And I just want to make sure that is captured in that part of the conversation in terms of not just providing the housing, but also like ways for folks to pay for the housing, jobs, and then access to where that housing is located and access to job centers and things like that. So I think that is super important, because again, mortgages are not cheap. They're not, and they're just going to continue to go up on top of monthly housing costs, maintenance, whatever. So I don't want to send people into a burning house just because we want to provide them a house. If that makes sense.
Thank you. I think what I'm hearing, Emily and Aaron, is that I think we're lucky to have this opportunity to have both a department that's actually been helping us, not just through TOD program, but through the Affordable Housing Bond Measure, get affordable housing out, and can recognize some of the barriers that have happened as we try to put out the 3,900 units that we made into 5,100 units. So a successful program there, but I'm sure that there are barriers that we had to overcome in each of these different cities, and acknowledging what those barriers are. And one of them is the fiscal health of each and every one of our cities that we have been trying to talk about for the last several years. But I think that's where this comes down to, is how we grow and who pays for it matters. And they're not in balance right now. And having growth pay its own way means that we have no growth, either internally inside the urban growth boundary, or when we do an expansion, it makes it that much harder. So I think what I'm hearing is that we need an action plan, not a theoretical set of things that we could do, but things that we can pragmatically get done, and who our partners are on that, and what our ask is of that. In other words, for Emily, what is the financial stack for the entire region to actually get this range of housing done from private to public? What does the private side need in order to get the whole range of housing done? And what is the nonprofit government side for publicly subsidized housing need in order to get the types of projects we need done? Not just what policies, not just the theoretical of, I think what I'm hearing from council is don't come back with a list of just best practices, but like, what does that mean on the implementation? Again, what are some scenarios in which we actually implement these things? And what is the cost and benefit to being able to do each and every one of those, and have that conversation with our cities and our counties, because they're the ones who actually implement it, not us. Our ability is to have this conversation. Our ability is to show what the cities feel is practical and doable, and what they want to tackle, what some of the other long game things are versus the short game, because we are in an emergency crisis. And so we do not have the luxury of just making this a theoretical planning document, right? I'm not saying that we do that all the time. I'm just saying I'm just overemphasizing this point until the cows come home. Every sacred cow has to come home and have the conversation about what do we actually need out of all these projects. So that's my Wisconsin coming out. Councilor Lewis, go ahead.
Sure, thank you. You said sacred cow. After I put my hand up, I'm gonna ask one. So obviously 18 of 24 cities, but then 3 counties. So tell me more about the county's responsibilities, in particular with the urban unincorporated areas. I represent lots of folks who live in unincorporated Clackamas County. I also represent some very opinionated folks who live in unincorporated Multnomah County. And I'm quite aware of the challenges folks face in Aloha and Washington County. So what is the responsibility of the 3 counties to come to the table with respect to those areas? And what is Metro's plan for addressing that large elephant in the room, or sacred cow, or whichever animal you'd like to assign to it?
Yeah, so this was a change in the implementation of the legislation that was identified as a need last year, the need to include unincorporated cities with populations over 10,000 in the requirements. So under the state legislation, the 3 counties, the unincorporated sections of the counties are required to create production strategies for those areas. I don't believe any of those have been completed yet.
no.
So we're really at the beginning. Like, this past year was the first year, and it's staggered for jurisdictions to start completing those. So we haven't seen what that looks like, but I think when you think about those areas and where, Metro can play a potential role in providing support, technical assistance, filling gaps, I think, Metro is well positioned to do that, but we haven't seen what those strategies will look like at the county level, other than I know we plan to have representatives of both county land use side and housing authorities at the table throughout this process.
Yeah, I would just say that county land use probably isn't equipped to do all of this. And the political environment the counties operate within, this is going to be so deprioritized. I think at certain level, particularly with parts of unincorporated Clackamas and unincorporated Aloha, those opportunities are too ripe for helping our regional need. We might want to intervene and highlight the importance of where there's massive gains that could be made with moderate level investment.
Thank you. Councilor Nolan.
Thanks, Madam President. And I should probably know the answer to this question, but it doesn't pop up when I do a record search. The governor has stated a goal of 36,000 units statewide. And this process that all the cities and metro are going through, and now counties on behalf of their unincorporated area are going through, should add up to 36,000. Is there any specific mechanism to assure that those match? The state hasn't told Metro, you need to produce a plan that will give us 20,000 units a year, or have they?
No, the state has not given Metro a set of requirements, but it has delivered as of the beginning of January targets for each of those 18 cities and 3 counties for their housing production targets for each of them to produce. So there is part of ONA, and we're getting I know a bit about it, but we would need expertise from GLCD to just really help you with the details of the law, but require that these housing production strategies are not just plans, they're actually saying how these cities will produce the number of units that have been allocated to them by the state. And that allocation is not just one number, it's by affordability level of housing requirements.
Yeah.
So there is a calculation that has all of those cities and counties, and they add up to something. And I think that number that the governor issued a couple of years back has evolved. You know, it's changing year after year. So that is a requirement of the state now, is to do that every year and to develop, to send production targets to each of those cities and counties each year.
And do you know, or can you point us to where those are and what the total is for the 18 cities and 3 counties? Because maybe it's not a directive to us, but I understand our charge to be help the cities and counties figure out how to get to their individual components. And maybe if there is some trading going on, for example, one city says, well, we can produce more than the governor asked us to. Can we be a broker in that?
We can absolutely connect you to where that information is.
Rough guess?
It's the Department of Land Conservation and Development has a website where they post all that data. So we can send that out as a follow-up.
Seems to me that should be one of our guiding lights as well. If we know that those 18 cities are looking for a total of
the number target, is
Yeah.
what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay, I hear you.
And just for clarification, my understanding with the housing needs analysis is we need to look at the production versus the needs and figure out what that gap is. Correct?
That's right. Yes.
Okay. So there's also that part of the conversation of if the production is lower than the need. Okay.
It's a very good question. I assume that goes into the analysis that the state is doing, and it's something I'm not as quite familiar with. But I had assumed that their production numbers were based on need.
And I thought that we were part of that needs assessment. No.
That we're actively doing the calculations. Is that what you mean by being part of it?
Yes.
They used some of the information from our urban growth report in their analysis, but developed the analysis on their own. We've been consulted, involved along the way.
All right. If there's any resources that you could get to the council so we can better track and read up some homework, that would be great.
Happy to do that.
Okay, awesome. All right, council, any other comments, suggestions, ideas? Thank you to everybody. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Aaron. Much appreciated. for this kickoff conversation and look forward to next round of specificity and how we move through this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to Chief Operating Officer Communication, Marisa.
Thank you so much, Council President. Actually, Holly Calhoun, Deputy COO here today, stepping in. Just wanted to provide a couple updates on last week's weather, inclement weather and some of the operational impacts. We had Metro South and Central transfer stations were closed to the public on Tuesday starting at 10:30, and then they remained closed on Friday. And Rid and Metro Pink were closed Thursday morning and Friday. At P5, we had the Arlene Schnitzler Concert Hall was canceled on Thursday. Everything else remained open. OCC closed at 3 on Thursday and remained closed on Friday. Expo Center did remain open and the Sportsman Show began as scheduled Friday. And then the most exciting is the Oregon Zoo did close, but managed to film segments of the Today Show. And KGW announcing the name and gender of our new baby elephant, baby girl, Tulatu. So hopefully y'all saw that in our celebrity Heidi Ron. And that's all I have for you today. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Holly. Counselors, any communication for the good of the order? Councilor Lewis.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm looking back through my calendar and it's been a minute since we've been in public meeting. So I just wanted to report back. 2 meetings of last week, one from Monday, one from Wednesday regarding housing. Supportive Housing Services Oversight Committee met Monday morning. They have finalized their transmittal letter and their recommendations. So they will be getting the recommendations for last fiscal year's housing strategy. We just talked about housing strategies. Supportive Housing Services program to us shortly, and it goes to us as well as the 3 counties. In regards to Wednesday's meeting, it was the Tri-County Planning Body, and that meeting was a really good meeting, both for progressing on the agenda of bringing regionalism front and center around the 6 priorities. But when we got to the end of the meeting, an important takeaway was a few minutes of discussion around the Regional Investment Fund. So as a reminder, everybody, Regional Investment Fund is the 5% set aside that is within each of the 3 counties. And they've had some carryover from the beginning years. So discussions began in a very productive way about using some of the carryover of the RIFT in order to absorb some of the shock of the upcoming lower collections in this budget year. And the commitment was made that Metro and the 3 counties would have pretty quick discussions if some of those funds that would still be in alignment with the 6 priorities could be used in order to not cut services in this upcoming budget. So that's the major takeaway from that meeting, and I'm happy to have deeper conversations, and Kristen Dennis has been tracking for our office. And then finally, another meeting I'd like to report back on is I attended our Zoo Foundation board meeting last Thursday morning. The foundation is obviously in good financial health and a good partner. Looked at some of the models around the flexibility in the membership program, needing to retain membership as one of the inflows to the zoo budget. And then also had a good conversation where the Zoo Foundation will continue to manage the PAC, which is important for purposes of us and our future planning. So happy to continue to liaison with that.
Awesome, thank you. Councilor Gonzalez.
Thanks, President Peterson. Yeah, and just to provide some updates. Last week, President Peterson and I had a good hour presentation with NAOP on supportive housing services. It was a robust conversation. And also we're able to present to West Side Economic Alliance as well, one of their committees. And then a week or two before this last week, President Peterson and I also had a good conversation with the Revitalized Portland Coalition. And so I think it's just kind of providing those updates on the work and continuing to center the North Star of the supportive housing services measure, all the work that everyone around this table is putting into that and taking it into stakeholders for some discussion. So there's way more work happening, but I did want to highlight those conversations in particular as they're pretty essential. Good news with President Peterson's work group kicking off soon as well. So anyway, that's all for me.
Awesome. Seeing no more hands raised, I would just remind us that we are going to have a workshop that Paul Slyman is putting together on public-private partnerships coming up on April 3rd. More details to come. You'll see that coming from Kathy soon. I talked to Councilor Nolan this weekend about private-public partnerships that we might have in other places besides the idea for Expo, including potentially systems, the facility system rollout. And the reason I just want to think ahead of what other private-public partnerships we might have at Metro in the future to get things done is so that we're inviting folks to that workshop, because it's not just for us, it's for others to attend, including I would encourage statewide elected officials to be part of that conversation, because I don't think that we're going to be able to move a transportation agenda forward without a private-public partnership, at least over the next 4 years, if not longer, if things go the way they're going. So if you have ideas for inviting folks, please let Paul know, and we'll get those invites out. Anything else for the good of the order? All right. Well, then we are adjourned for this work session, and our next regularly scheduled meeting is for Thursday, February 20th at 10:30 a.m. See you all there. Thanks so much.